Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Vlogs of History. I'm your host, Darius Cousin, and this week we're looking at an event that had a huge impact on human progress. In July of 1969, humankind took a huge step, and by step, I really mean literally a huge step. We've actually managed to leave Earth and land on the moon. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were all aboard the Apollo 11 spacecraft that would be the first NASA mission to successfully land humans on the moon. And that's what this week's video is all about. So let's get to it. In the 60s, there was a huge space race between the Soviet Union and the United States. The race revolved around the space capabilities of the two countries. Launching satellites and human spaceflight were the center focus of the space race. Apollo 11 officially ended that race and fulfilled a national goal proposed by John F. Kennedy that by the end of the decade, which is the 60s, they would successfully land humans on the moon and be able to bring them back to Earth safely. Apollo 11 was a three-man crew, and out of the three, well, only two actually managed to step foot on the moon. This was because Michael Collins had to stay in the lunar orbit to prepare things in the command module for when the other two got back from the moon. The actual Apollo 11 spacecraft consisted of several parts that each detached themselves as they got closer to the moon. The final detachment was the lunar module, which would be the actual module that would make it to the moon, would detach itself from the command module while Michael Collins would stay in orbit. The trip from Earth to the moon takes about 3 days, and radio communications tell us that after those 3 days, when they were beginning to prepare for their descent, they were about 4 seconds off in their descent, which may not seem like a lot, but it actually resulted in them landing several miles off their intended destination. Despite that, and the computer just not being able to produce the calculations in real time and giving off errors, they managed to successfully land on the moon with about 25 seconds left of fuel. Now keep in mind that's not normal, and they actually just barely made it. Once on the moon, they began preparations for actually going outside. They looked through the little window that they had to see where they would set up their equipment and how they would proceed. Neil Armstrong was the first one of the two to actually step foot on the moon, and he is officially recognized as the first human on the moon with the famous quote, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Although recent studies suggest that he may have said one small step for a man, the important part here is that he actually made it onto the moon. I mean, how crazy is that? We've reached a point where we can send humans on the moon. I mean, it's the moon. The goal for the mission was to collect dust and set up equipment that would measure the moon's activity, such as earthquakes. This was to give us a better understanding of what the moon was actually made of and how the moon functioned as a satellite. They also planted the very first United States flag on the moon, which funnily enough tipped over when they were leaving because of the exhaust from the actual engine from the lunar module. Later missions actually had to set up a safe perimeter to prevent the flag from tipping over. They spent about 21.5 hours on the moon's surface in total. They described the experience to be incredible. They described walking to be very easy because of the reduced gravity that you have on the moon. And despite the fact that the moon's temperature varies from 250 degrees during the day to minus 385 degrees at night, they reported feeling very little change because of their suits. The only change they actually felt was that during the day, the sun's rays would make their mask a bit warmer and thus would give them the impression of being a little bit warmer. After having completed their mission and what they had to do on the surface, they returned to the lunar module where they slept before leaving the moon. While in the lunar module and sleeping, Michael Collins actually knocked over a switch that could have potentially stranded them on the moon. I mean, the risk was there, so much so that President Nixon had prepared a big and emotional speech should anything happen and should they be stranded on the moon, not being able to come back to Earth. Luckily, nothing happened and they were able to make it back to the command module to get back with Michael Collins and safely make it back to Earth, marking this as one of the most important steps, and I mean literally steps, of human progress in recent years. Alright, that was it for this week's episode of Vlogs of History. If you've enjoyed it, leave a like, share it to a friend, and subscribe to be notified when episode 6 comes out. Comment down below to let me know what you want to see in future videos. I do read the comments and I do look at them for inspiration. If you're new to the show, well, what are you doing? Click that subscribe button, and if you want to see the previous episodes, you can check them out right here. As always, I'm your host, Darius Cousin. You can follow me on social media. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I will see you all next week.